The stagecoach rattled into Bismarck, Dakota Territory, on a sweltering afternoon in July of 1878, carrying precious cargo that would change everything for rancher Kenneth Finch. A mail-order bride who had defied his expectations by bringing her dying father along for the journey. Kenneth stood outside the station, hat in hand, dust coating his worn boots as he watched the vehicle lumber to a stop. He had expected a young woman seeking a new life out west, not the sight that greeted him when the door swung open. A slender figure in a gray traveling dress descended first, her auburn hair pinned back beneath a simple bonnet, followed by the labored emergence of an older man who could barely stand without assistance. The woman turned toward Kenneth, her green eyes meeting his with a mixture of defiance and desperation that struck him immediately. She could not have been more than 22 years old, with delicate features marked by exhaustion and worry lines too deep for someone so young. "Mr. Finch." Her voice carried the refined accent of someone educated back east, perhaps Boston or Philadelphia. "That would be me, yes." Kenneth stepped forward, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow across the dusty ground. At 27, he had built his ranch from nothing, but standing before this woman made him feel suddenly inadequate. "You must be Miss Faith Garrett." "Mrs. Garrett, actually." She glanced back at the older man struggling to remain upright against the stagecoach. "Widow." "This is my father, Thomas Garrett. I apologize for the surprise, Mr. Finch. I know our correspondence did not mention him, but circumstances changed rapidly before our departure." Kenneth observed the father more carefully now. Thomas Garrett had the gaunt, hollow-eyed appearance of consumption, his skin carrying that translucent quality that spoke of months spent battling illness. The man could not have weighed more than 120 pounds, his frame stooped and trembling. "Pa needs to sit," Faith said, her composure cracking slightly. The journey was difficult for him. Without hesitation, Kenneth moved to Thomas's other side. "Let me help you, sir. My wagon is just over here." Thomas looked up at him with clouded blue eyes. "I apologize for the imposition, young man. Faith insisted I come, though I told her it was foolish." "No imposition at all." Kenneth gently supported the older man's weight, struck by how light he felt, like holding a collection of bird bones. "Let us get you somewhere comfortable." Faith hurried ahead to the wagon, and Kenneth noticed she carried herself with practiced efficiency despite her obvious fatigue. She had already climbed up and was arranging blankets in the back by the time Kenneth helped Thomas across the dusty street. "If you can lift him up, I will settle him," Faith directed. "All business now." Kenneth did as instructed, carefully lifting Thomas into the wagon bed where Faith immediately began fussing over him, propping his head on a folded coat and covering him despite the heat. "He gets chills," she explained without looking at Kenneth. "The fever comes and goes." Kenneth retrieved their trunk and 2 small bags from the station, loading them alongside the supplies he had already purchased. When he climbed onto the driver's bench, Faith remained in the back with her father, one hand resting protectively on his shoulder. The ride to Kenneth's ranch took nearly an hour, following the Missouri River northwest, before turning onto the rough track that led to his property. Kenneth owned 300 acres of good grazing land, with a modest house he had built himself 2 years prior, a barn and various outbuildings. It was not grand, but it was honest work honestly earned. "Your letter mentioned you were a widower," Kenneth said over his shoulder, trying to make conversation despite the awkward circumstances. "My husband died of cholera 3 years ago," Faith replied, her voice steady despite discussing tragedy. "We had been married only 8 months. After that, I returned to Philadelphia to care for my father, but our resources dwindled. When he became truly ill 6 months ago, The medical expenses consumed everything we had left. Kenneth understood the unspoken admission. She had answered his advertisement out of desperation, not desire. It was not the romantic beginning he might have imagined during his lonely nights on the ranch, but he found he did not mind as much as he might have expected. "I am sorry for your losses," he said simply. "Thank you." A pause then. "Your letter was kind. That was why I chose to respond to your advertisement rather than others. You did not make grand promises or speak of wealth you clearly did not possess. You were honest about the hardship and isolation. I appreciated that." Kenneth felt warmth spread through his chest at her words. He had agonized over that letter, rewriting it a dozen times before sending it to the matrimonial agency. He had been honest to a fault, certain no woman would want a simple rancher living in remote territory, but Faith had responded within a month. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise. It was a sturdy structure of wood and stone, single-story with a covered porch and shuttered windows. Kenneth had planted cottonwood trees when he first broke ground, and they now provided shade on the western side. "Here we are," Kenneth announced, pulling the horses to a stop near the front steps. Faith surveyed the property with an appraising eye. Kenneth wondered what she thought, this educated city woman confronted with frontier simplicity. The house had 3 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen, a bedroom, and a small second room he used for storage and winter provisions. "It looks well built," Faith said finally, and Kenneth detected approval in her tone. "I did most of the work myself." He hopped down and moved to help Thomas from the wagon. "The bedroom is yours and your father's. I will take the smaller room." Faith climbed down without assistance, smoothing her dusty skirts. "Mr. Finch, we are to be married. It would not be proper for me to take your bedroom. We will discuss sleeping arrangements after your father is settled." Kenneth carefully lifted Thomas, who had drifted into a light doze. "He needs proper rest in a real bed." Faith could not argue with that logic. She hurried ahead to open doors while Kenneth carried Thomas inside. The main room was clean but sparse, furnished with a table, 4 chairs, a cookstove, and shelves holding basic supplies. The bedroom was equally simple. A bed Kenneth had constructed from pine, a dresser, a washstand, and a trunk at the foot of the bed. Kenneth laid Thomas on the bed as gently as possible. The older man's eyes fluttered open briefly. "Thank you, son," Thomas whispered before sleep claimed him again. Faith immediately set about making her father comfortable, removing his shoes and loosening his collar. Kenneth retreated to give her privacy, busying himself with bringing in their belongings and unhitching the horses. By the time he returned to the house, Faith had emerged from the bedroom and stood surveying the kitchen area with her sleeves rolled up and a determined set to her jaw. "When did you last have a proper meal?" she asked without preamble. Kenneth tried to remember. "I had some beans and cornbread yesterday evening." "Yesterday?" Faith shook her head. "Show me what provisions you have." For the next hour, Kenneth found himself relegated to observer, as Faith transformed his bachelor's kitchen into something resembling actual civilization. She inventoried his supplies, asked pointed questions about water sources and storage, and began preparing a meal with efficiency that spoke of experience managing a household. "You know your way around a kitchen," Kenneth observed from where he sat at the table, mending a bridle he had been meaning to fix for weeks. "I ran my father's household after my mother died when I was 16, Faith replied, stirring something that smelled infinitely better than anything Kenneth had cooked in months. "We entertained frequently before his illness. I can prepare a meal for 30 with 4 hours' notice." Kenneth filed away this information, building a picture of the woman who had traveled halfway across the country to marry him. Educated, capable, experienced with loss. She had not come seeking adventure but survival, bringing her dying father because the alternative was abandoning him to a pauper's hospital. "Does it bother you?" Faith asked suddenly, turning to face him. "That I am not what you expected," Kenneth considered his answer carefully. "I expected someone desperate enough to marry a stranger and move to Dakota Territory. The details do not change that basic truth." Something shifted in Faith's expression, a softening around her eyes. "That is a fair assessment. Your father seems like a good man," Kenneth continued. "However long he has, he should be comfortable and cared for. That is what decent people do." Faith's composure cracked then, just for a moment. Her eyes glistened before she turned back to the stove, but Kenneth had seen the emotion there. They ate dinner together at the table, Faith having prepared a surprisingly good stew from salt pork, potatoes, and dried vegetables. She checked on Thomas between courses, coaxing him to eat a few bites before he drifted back to sleep. "The doctor in Philadelphia said he had perhaps 2 or 3 months," Faith said quietly when she returned. "That was 6 weeks ago. He is stronger than they predicted, but the consumption is spreading. You can hear it in his breathing." "There is a doctor in Bismarck," Kenneth offered. "Not much of one, but he trained back east. I can bring him out tomorrow." "That is kind of you." Faith pushed food around her plate. "I should warn you, Mr. Finch. I used the last of my money for our passage west. I cannot pay for medical care, and I know that whatever agreement we reach about our marriage, you did not sign up for expensive treatments." "We will manage," Kenneth said simply. "I am not wealthy, but the ranch does well enough. Winter stores are full, the cattle are healthy, and I have some savings." Faith looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Why are you being so kind? You could send us back. You would be within your rights." Kenneth met her gaze steadily. "My mother died when I was 10. My father raised me and my 2 sisters alone until he passed 5 years back. He taught me that family takes care of family, and that kindness is not conditional on convenience. You came here in good faith, Miss Garrett. You and your father are under my roof now, which makes you my responsibility." "Mrs. Garrett," she corrected softly. "And I am meant to become Mrs. Finch, I suppose, though the timing seems complicated now." "We can wait," Kenneth said, "until your father recovers or—" He let the sentence hang unfinished. Faith nodded, understanding the unspoken reality. Yes. Waiting would be wise. They finished the meal in comfortable silence, and Kenneth insisted on washing the dishes while Faith tended to Thomas. When she emerged again, exhaustion had settled over her like a heavy blanket. "You need rest," Kenneth observed. "You have been traveling for days." "I cannot take your bedroom, Mr. Finch. You already have. I will be fine in the storage room. I have slept in worse places." He had already moved his clothes and personal items to the smaller room while she was occupied with her father. Faith seemed too tired to argue further. "Thank you." "Truly?" Kenneth showed her where he kept the spare blankets and linens, demonstrated how to work the window latches for ventilation, and left her to settle in. The storage room was cramped but adequate, with space for a bedroll on the floor and his few possessions. He lay awake long into the night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other people in his house. Faith's soft footsteps as she checked on Thomas, her quiet murmurs of comfort, the old man's labored breathing. Kenneth had been alone for 2 years since his father's death. His sisters had both married and moved to Oregon, leaving him to manage the ranch solo. He had advertised for a wife partly for companionship, but mostly for practical reasons. Running a ranch alone meant 12-hour days of backbreaking work with no one to share the load or the life. Now he had inherited not just a mail-order bride but a dying man and circumstances far more complex than he had anticipated. Yet as he drifted toward sleep, Kenneth found he did not resent the complication. There was something about Faith's quiet strength and fierce devotion to her father that stirred admiration in him. Morning came early, as it always did on a working ranch. Kenneth rose before dawn, dressed quietly, and stepped outside to begin his chores. The cattle needed checking, horses needed feeding, and a dozen other tasks awaited. He was mucking out stalls when Faith appeared in the barn doorway, still wearing her gray dress from yesterday but with an apron tied over it. "I did not hear you get up," she said. "I would have made breakfast." "You need rest more than I need a fancy breakfast," Kenneth replied, leaning on his pitchfork. "How is your father this morning?" Sleeping peacefully. "His breathing is slightly easier, which sometimes happens after rest." She moved further into the barn, examining the horses with interest. "What breed are these?" "Mixed stock, mostly. The bay mare has some thoroughbred in her, and the gelding is part Mustang. Tough animals for tough country." Kenneth resumed his work. "If you are set on cooking, I would not say no to coffee." Faith smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. It transformed her face completely, erasing years of worry. "I can manage coffee, I think." She returned to the house, and Kenneth finished his morning chores with unusual speed, drawn by the prospect of company over breakfast. When he entered the house, washed and presentable, Faith had prepared eggs, biscuits, and coffee. The simple meal felt like luxury. "This is excellent," Kenneth said around a mouthful of biscuit. "You are a good cook." "Thank you." Faith poured coffee for them both. "I was thinking, Mr. Finch, about our arrangement." Kenneth set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "I cannot be your wife, not properly, while my father lives," Faith continued carefully. "It would not be right, sharing a home as man and wife when he is dying in the next room, but I can contribute to the household. I can cook, clean, help with whatever work you need. Think of me as an employee rather than a bride, at least for now." Kenneth considered this. "That seems reasonable, but I do not want you thinking you have to earn your keep. You and your father are welcome here regardless." "I would prefer to be useful," Faith said firmly. "I am not comfortable being dependent on charity, however well-intentioned." "Fair enough." Kenneth raised his coffee cup in agreement. "I should warn you, housework on a ranch is not like city housework. It is harder and dirtier." "I expect I will manage," Faith replied with a hint of challenge in her tone. Kenneth found himself looking forward to seeing this proper Philadelphia lady tackle frontier life. He suspected she had more grit than her refined appearance suggested. After breakfast, Kenneth rode into Bismarck to fetch Dr. Morrison, a gruff Scotsman who had practiced medicine for 30 years before retiring to Dakota Territory for his health. The doctor arrived in his own wagon by early afternoon, black bag in hand and skepticism written across his weathered face. "Consumption, you said?" Dr. Morrison asked as Kenneth led him inside. "That is what the doctors in Philadelphia diagnosed." Faith met them at the door and Kenneth made introductions. Dr. Morrison softened slightly upon seeing her worried expression. "Let me examine him, lass," the doctor said kindly. "You wait out here." The examination took 20 minutes. When Dr. Morrison emerged, his expression was grave. "It is consumption, no question," the doctor reported. "Advanced stage. His left lung is severely compromised and the right is beginning to show involvement. He is also malnourished and exhausted from travel." "How long?" Faith asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Impossible to say with certainty. Could be weeks, could be 2 or 3 months if he is strong. He is getting good care, which helps." Dr. Morrison addressed Kenneth directly. "Keep him comfortable, well-fed if he can eat. Fresh air helps some folks, though it is hard to say if it makes a real difference. I will leave some laudanum for pain and a tonic that might ease his breathing." Kenneth paid the doctor's fee without hesitation, despite the significant dent it made in his savings. After Dr. Morrison departed, Faith retreated to the bedroom to sit with Thomas. Kenneth gave her privacy, heading back outside to tackle the endless work a ranch demanded. The days developed a rhythm after that. Kenneth rose at dawn to handle livestock and property maintenance. Faith woke shortly after, prepared breakfast, tended to Thomas, and then threw herself into managing the household. She cleaned the accumulation of bachelor neglect from every corner, organized supplies with military precision, and cooked meals that made Kenneth look forward to every dining hour. Thomas had good days and bad days. On good days, he sat on the porch in a chair Kenneth had padded with blankets, watching the countryside with a contemplative expression. On bad days, he barely left the bed, racked with coughing fits that brought up blood. Kenneth made a point of spending time with Thomas on the good days. The older man had been a banker before his illness, educated and well-spoken. They discussed politics, philosophy, and life in general. Kenneth grew to genuinely like Thomas, understanding where Faith had learned her strength and intelligence. "You are a good man, Kenneth," Thomas said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. "Better than Faith or I had any right to expect." "You raised a remarkable daughter," Kenneth replied. "That speaks well of you, sir." Thomas smiled, though the expression tugged at Kenneth's heart because of how it emphasized the older man's deterioration. "She was always special, smarter than me if I am honest. She should have gone to university, but that was not done for women in my youth. Instead, she married that wastrel Robert Garrett. Faith does not speak much about her first husband. Not surprised. He was charming but useless, spent money we did not have on schemes that never worked. When the cholera came through, took him and 100 others, I think Faith was more relieved than grieved. Makes me sad that. She deserved better." Kenneth absorbed this information, another piece of the puzzle that was Faith. "She will have better now if she will have me." Thomas turned to study Kenneth with eyes that were cloudy but still sharp. "You are falling for her." It was not a question. Kenneth did not bother denying it. "Yes, sir, I reckon I am." "Good." Thomas nodded with satisfaction. "She deserves a man who will love her proper. Just do not tell her yet. Faith is practical to a fault sometimes. Let her come to it in her own time." Kenneth promised he would, though keeping his growing feelings hidden proved challenging as the weeks passed. Faith was everything he had not known he needed. Intelligent, capable, and possessed of a dry humor that emerged when she felt comfortable. She handled ranch life with admirable resilience, learning to manage a cookstove that could be temperamental, dealing with the isolation without complaint, and even helping with outdoor chores when Kenneth needed extra hands. 3 weeks after their arrival, a violent thunderstorm rolled across the plains. Kenneth was in the barn securing the horses when Faith appeared, soaked to the skin despite the oilcloth coat he had lent her. "One of the steers broke through the fence on the north pasture," she shouted over the wind and rain. "I saw it from the window." Kenneth cursed under his breath. Loose cattle in a storm could scatter for miles. "I need to bring it back before it spooks the others." "I will help." "Faith, you need to stay with your father. Pa is sleeping soundly. I gave him laudanum an hour ago." She grabbed a rope from the barn wall with hands that already knew where things were kept. "You need help, Kenneth. Stop being stubborn." They rode out together into the storm, and Kenneth discovered Faith could handle a horse better than he had expected. They found the steer a quarter-mile out, confused and agitated. Working together, they managed to rope the animal and guide it back through the driving rain. By the time they returned to the barn, both were drenched and muddy but triumphant. Faith's hair had come loose from its pins, streaming down her back in wet ropes. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face, and Kenneth was struck by how beautiful she looked in that moment, vital and alive. "That was terrifying and exhilarating," Faith gasped, wiping water from her face. "You did well," Kenneth said, and he meant it. "Natural horsewoman. Hardly. I am shaking like a leaf." But she was grinning, eyes bright with the thrill of adventure. They stood there in the barn, dripping and breathless, and Kenneth felt the air between them shift into something electric. He took a step closer without conscious thought. Faith's smile faded, replaced by something more serious. "Kenneth!" The barn door banged open and they sprang apart. Thomas stood in the doorway, bracing himself against the frame, his nightshirt plastered to his skeletal frame. "Pa," Faith rushed to him. "What are you doing out here? You should be in bed." "Woke up and you were gone," Thomas wheezed. "Got worried." Kenneth helped Faith guide Thomas back to the house, the moment broken but not forgotten. After they had Thomas settled and warm, Faith disappeared to change into dry clothes while Kenneth did the same in his small room. That night, lying on his bedroll, Kenneth acknowledged the truth he had been avoiding. He was not just falling for Faith. He had already fallen, completely and irrevocably. The question now was what to do about it. August brought scorching heat and the reality that Thomas was declining. The good days became fewer, the bad days longer and more painful. Dr. Morrison visited twice more, each time with less hope in his prognosis. "His heart is weakening," the doctor told Kenneth privately during the second visit. "The strain of the lung damage is too much. I would be surprised if he sees September." Kenneth shared this news with Faith that evening as they washed dishes together, a routine they had fallen into. "I know," Faith said quietly. "I can see it. He is so tired now, Kenneth. Sometimes I think he is only holding on because he worries about me." "You have a home here," Kenneth said firmly. "Regardless of anything else, you have a home." Faith looked at him with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. "Why are you so good to us? You did not sign up for this." Kenneth dried his hands on a towel, then gently took Faith's hands in his own, damp and soap-slicked. "At first, I did it because it was the right thing. But now, Faith, I care about you. More than I probably should given the circumstances, but there it is. Kenneth." His name was a whisper on her lips. "I am not asking for anything," Kenneth continued. "Not until you are ready, not until after. I just needed you to know that whatever happens, you are not alone anymore." Faith squeezed his hands tightly. "I care about you too. These weeks here, seeing how you are with my father, how you have accepted us both without judgment or resentment, I have come to care very much. But I cannot think about a future while Pa is. I know. I am not asking you to." Kenneth released her hands reluctantly. "Just know it is there, waiting when you are ready." Thomas passed on an August evening 2 weeks later, quietly and peacefully in his sleep. Faith had been reading to him from the Bible, something he had requested more frequently as the end approached. Kenneth sat with them, whittling a piece of wood into a small bird as was his habit. Thomas opened his eyes one last time as the sun was setting, casting golden light through the bedroom window. "Faith, my darling girl," he whispered. "I am here, Pa." Faith took his hand. "You will be happy now. Kenneth will make you happy." Thomas's gaze shifted to Kenneth. "Take care of her, son. She is everything good in this world." "I will, sir, I promise." Thomas smiled, closed his eyes, and simply stopped breathing. It was that gentle, that quiet. One moment he was there, the next he had slipped away like the day into night. Faith did not cry at first. She sat holding her father's hand, murmuring prayers Kenneth did not quite hear. He waited, patient and present, until she finally stood and turned into his arms. Then the tears came, great racking sobs of grief and relief mixed together. Kenneth held her through it all, one hand stroking her hair, the other pressed firmly against her back to anchor her to the present. They buried Thomas on a small rise overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree that would shade his grave. Kenneth built a sturdy wooden cross and carved Thomas's name with care. Dr. Morrison attended, as did several neighbors who had heard of Thomas's passing. The circuit preacher was not due through for another month, but Kenneth read from the Bible passages Faith selected. After everyone left, Faith stood alone at the grave for a long time. Kenneth waited by the house, giving her space to grieve. When she finally returned, the sun was setting again, painting the world in shades of orange and purple. "He liked it here," Faith said as she reached Kenneth. "He told me that last week that he was glad we came. He said it was better to die in wide open country under big skies than in a cramped city room. He was a wise man." Faith nodded, then surprised Kenneth by taking his hand. "Thank you for everything you did for him, for us. He was easy to care for, easy to like." Kenneth squeezed her hand gently. "What happens now is up to you, Faith. You can stay as long as you want, forever if you want. We can marry or not marry. I will not pressure you either way." Faith looked up at him, her green eyes clear despite the grief he knew still weighed on her. "I need some time. Not long, but some time to properly mourn and settle my mind. Take all the time you need." She rested her head against his shoulder briefly, a gesture of trust that warmed Kenneth more than any words. "You are a remarkable man, Kenneth Finch." The next few weeks passed quietly. Faith sorted through her father's few belongings, keeping some items and donating others to families in need. She maintained the household with the same efficiency as before, but seemed lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted even in grief. Kenneth gave her space while remaining present and supportive. They still worked together, ate together, talked late into the evenings on the porch as summer faded toward autumn. The easy companionship between them deepened into something more profound, built on respect and shared experience. One evening in mid-September, as they sat watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Faith spoke. "I have been thinking about your proposal, the original one from your letter." Kenneth's heart picked up speed, but he kept his voice calm. "And I should like to accept it if the offer still stands." Faith turned to face him. "I want to marry you, Kenneth, not because I need security or a home, though those things matter, but because I have come to love you. Somewhere between your kindness to my father and your patience with me, I fell in love with you." Kenneth felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. "You love me." "I do." Faith smiled, and this time the expression was full of hope rather than sorrow. "Is that all right?" In answer, Kenneth cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her. It was their first kiss, tender and searching, full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you too," Kenneth said. "Have for weeks now, was trying to be patient and proper about it." Faith laughed, a sound of pure joy. "I think we can stop being quite so proper now." They married the following week when the circuit preacher came through Bismarck. It was a simple ceremony in the small church, witnessed by Dr. Morrison and a few neighbors who had become friends. Faith wore a dress she had remade from one of her better Philadelphia gowns, dyed a soft blue with indigo. Kenneth wore his cleanest clothes and boots he had polished until they shone. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Kenneth kissed Faith with all the pent-up feeling he had been restraining for months. She kissed him back just as fervently, and the small congregation cheered. The wedding supper was held at the ranch, with Faith having prepared an impressive meal despite Kenneth's protests that she should not have to cook on her wedding day. "I wanted to," she insisted. "This is our home, Kenneth. I wanted our marriage to begin here properly." That night, Kenneth finally moved his belongings from the storage room into the bedroom he would now share with his wife. Faith had changed the space, adding small touches that made it feel more welcoming. Curtains on the windows, a colorful quilt on the bed, wildflowers in a jar on the dresser. "Are you nervous?" Kenneth asked as they stood together in the soft lamplight. "A little," Faith admitted. "My first marriage was not particularly happy in that regard. Robert was not a patient or considerate man." Kenneth took both her hands in his. "We will go at whatever pace you need. I want this to be good for you, Faith. That is what matters to me." The tenderness in his voice made Faith's eyes shine with emotion. "I love you so much. How did I get so lucky?" "I am the lucky one," Kenneth replied, and then showed her with actions rather than words how much he meant it. Their wedding night was everything Faith had never known intimacy could be. Gentle and patient, passionate and loving. Kenneth took his time learning what pleased her, attentive to every sigh and response. When it was over, Faith lay in his arms feeling cherished in a way she had never experienced. "That was different," she murmured against his chest. "Different good or different bad, different wonderful." Faith kissed the skin beneath her cheek. "I did not know it could be like that." Kenneth tightened his arms around her. "It will only get better, I promise." He was right. As the days and weeks passed, they grew comfortable with each other in every way. Faith blossomed under Kenneth's consistent love and care, her laughter coming more easily, her smiles more frequent. She proved to be an invaluable partner in running the ranch, equally comfortable helping birth a calf or negotiating prices with buyers who came through looking for stock. Kenneth, for his part, found that married life suited him better than he ever could have imagined. Coming home to a warm house and a loving wife transformed the ranch from a place he worked into a true home. He delighted in small intimacies, watching Faith brush her hair before bed, feeling her curl against him on cold nights, hearing her hum while she cooked. Winter came to Dakota Territory with its usual fierce intensity. Snow piled high, and temperatures plunged well below zero. Kenneth and Faith spent long evenings indoors, playing cards, reading aloud to each other, and simply talking. They made love often, finding in physical intimacy a respite from winter's harshness. It was during one of those long winter nights, as they lay tangled together in contentment, that Faith made an announcement. "I think I am with child." Kenneth went very still. "You think?" "I am fairly certain." "All the signs are there." Faith propped herself up on one elbow to look at him properly. "How do you feel about that?" "How do I feel?" Kenneth pulled her down into a crushing embrace. "I feel like the most blessed man in Dakota Territory, maybe in the whole country." Faith laughed, the sound muffled against his shoulder. "I am glad you are pleased. I was hoping you would be." "Pleased does not begin to cover it." Kenneth pulled back to look at her face. "When?" "Late summer, I think. July or August." Kenneth did the mental calculations. Their child had likely been conceived shortly after their wedding, during those first passionate weeks of marriage. "We should get Dr. Morrison out here to confirm." "In this weather?" "Kenneth, it will keep until spring." Women have been having babies since the dawn of time without doctors hovering over them. But Kenneth insisted, and when the weather cleared enough for travel, he made the trip into Bismarck to bring Dr. Morrison back. The doctor confirmed what Faith already knew. She was indeed pregnant, about 3 months along, and appeared to be in excellent health. "Keep doing what you are doing," Dr. Morrison advised. "Eat well, rest when you need to, and do not do anything foolishly strenuous. Though something tells me your husband will not let you overwork yourself." "You have that right," Kenneth agreed firmly. After the doctor left, Kenneth became almost comically protective. He tried to stop Faith from doing any heavy lifting, from riding horses, from anything he deemed potentially dangerous. Faith tolerated it for a week before putting her foot down. "Kenneth Finch, I love you dearly, but if you do not stop treating me like I am made of glass, I will lose my mind," she declared one evening. "I am pregnant, not ill. Women work right up until their time comes. I will be fine. I just want to keep you safe, both of you." Faith softened at the worry in his eyes. "I know, and I love you for it, but I need to be useful to work. It is who I am. I promise I will not take foolish risks." They compromised. Faith continued managing the household and helping with lighter ranch work, while Kenneth took on the heavier tasks and made sure she rested regularly. As her pregnancy progressed, Faith dealt with the usual discomforts with characteristic pragmatism, though Kenneth noticed she tired more easily and napped most afternoons. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Calves were born, and the herd expanded nicely. Kenneth hired a young man named Peter to help with the increased workload, wanting to ensure he could be close to the house as Faith's delivery date approached. In late July, as the summer heat turned oppressive, Faith went into labor. Kenneth had prepared as best he could, having consulted with Dr. Morrison multiple times about what to expect. He sent Peter racing into town for the doctor, but babies operate on their own schedule. Faith's labor progressed quickly. Kenneth stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping her brow with cool water, murmuring encouragement even as his heart thundered with fear. Childbirth was dangerous on the frontier. He had known women who died in labor, leaving behind grieving husbands and motherless children. "I am not going anywhere," Faith gasped between contractions, as if reading his thoughts. "I am too stubborn, remember. I am holding you to that." Dr. Morrison arrived as Faith entered the final stage of labor. He washed his hands, examined Faith quickly, and nodded with satisfaction. "Baby is positioned well. You are doing fine, lass. Just keep pushing when the urges come." 20 minutes later, a baby's cry filled the small bedroom. Kenneth watched in awe as Dr. Morrison lifted a tiny, squirming infant. "You have a son," the doctor announced, placing the baby on Faith's chest after a quick check. Kenneth stared at his son, overwhelmed by the fierce love that struck him like a physical blow. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, covered in vernix and absolutely perfect. "Hello, little one," Faith murmured, tears streaming down her face as she cradled the infant. "Welcome to the world." Kenneth leaned down to kiss Faith's damp forehead, then gently touched his son's tiny hand. Impossibly, small fingers wrapped around his index finger with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Kenneth whispered. "You are perfect, thank you. We made him together," Faith replied with a tired smile. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Kenneth looked at his son, thinking of Faith's father who had brought them together in an unexpected way. What about Thomas? Thomas Kenneth Finch. Fresh tears spilled down Faith's cheeks. "Pa would have loved that. Thomas it is, Doctor." Morrison stayed for several hours, ensuring both mother and baby were stable before accepting payment and heading back to town. Kenneth barely remembered the doctor leaving. He was too busy marveling at his wife and son. Faith recovered well from the birth, though Kenneth insisted she rest for 2 weeks before resuming any household work. He took over cooking and cleaning, discovering he was terrible at both, but Faith seemed to find his efforts endearing rather than frustrating. "You burned the biscuits again," she observed with amusement as Kenneth presented breakfast one morning. "They are crispy, not burned," Kenneth protested, though the blackened bottoms argued otherwise. Baby Thomas thrived, growing plump and healthy on his mother's milk. He had Kenneth's dark hair but Faith's green eyes, and both parents were hopelessly besotted with him. Kenneth found himself hurrying through chores so he could return to the house and spend time with his son. "You are going to spoil him," Faith teased one evening as Kenneth rocked Thomas long after the baby had fallen asleep. "He is my son. I am allowed to spoil him a little." Faith smiled indulgently. "I suppose you are." The first year of Thomas's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights, first smiles, first teeth, and first steps. The ranch continued to prosper. Kenneth expanded the herd and purchased more land, building the foundation for a legacy he could pass to his son. Faith proved to be a wonderful mother, patient and loving while maintaining the efficient household management that kept everything running smoothly. She adapted to motherhood the same way she had adapted to ranch life, with determination and grace. When Thomas was 18 months old, Faith discovered she was pregnant again. This time Kenneth managed to contain his protectiveness to reasonable levels, having learned his lesson the first time. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose, arrived in early spring 2 years after Thomas's birth. She was a calm baby compared to her brother, with Kenneth's brown eyes and auburn hair that darkened as she grew. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Kenneth and Faith worked the ranch together, raised their children together, and built a life that exceeded anything either had imagined that hot day in July when Faith had stepped off the stagecoach. Years passed, marked by the familiar cycles of ranch life. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved working alongside his father. Margaret was more adventurous, always exploring and asking questions. 2 more children followed, another son, James, and then a surprise daughter, Catherine, born when Faith was nearly 40. The ranch expanded significantly over the years. Kenneth's cattle operation became one of the most respected in the territory, later the state when Dakota became North Dakota in 1889. He built a larger house, wanting his growing family to have more space, though Faith insisted on keeping the original house standing. "That is where we fell in love," she said firmly. "Where Thomas was born, it means something." So Kenneth converted it into a guest house and office, preserving the space where their life together had begun. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Kenneth and Faith stood on the porch of the new house, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 19 now, helping manage the ranch with skill that made Kenneth proud. Margaret was 17 and courting a young man from town. James was 14 and obsessed with horses. Catherine, at 8, was everyone's darling. "Can you believe it has been 20 years?" Faith asked, leaning against Kenneth's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday you stepped off that stage," Kenneth replied, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Other times it feels like we have been together forever." "I was so scared that day," Faith admitted. "Coming here with Pa, not knowing what to expect, afraid you would turn us away. Best day of my life, even if I did not know it then." Kenneth kissed the top of her head. "You and your father gave me everything I did not know I needed." Faith turned in his arms to face him properly. At 43, she was still beautiful to Kenneth, her face lined with laugh lines and sun exposure, but her eyes as bright and intelligent as ever. "I love you, Kenneth Finch, more now than I did when we married, which I would not have thought possible." "I love you too," Kenneth replied. "Always have, always will." They kissed, comfortable and familiar, yet still carrying the spark that had been there from the beginning. From the yard, their children made exaggerated gagging sounds which made both parents laugh. "We are embarrassing them," Faith observed. "Good. That is what parents are for." As the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Kenneth reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. A desperate woman answering an advertisement, arriving with her dying father, met by a lonely rancher who chose kindness over convenience. Thomas Garrett had been right, Kenneth thought. Faith deserved to be happy, and Kenneth had spent 20 years ensuring she was. In return, she had given him love, partnership, children, and a life richer than any he could have built alone. The mail-order bride who had arrived with her dying father had become the center of Kenneth's world, the love of his life, and the foundation upon which they had built not just a ranch but a family and a legacy that would endure for generations. As darkness fell and stars emerged in the vast Dakota sky, Kenneth and Faith went inside to join their children for dinner. The house filled with laughter and conversation and the comfortable chaos of family life. It was everything Kenneth had dreamed of during those lonely years before Faith arrived, and so much more than he had dared to hope for. The ranch prospered, the children grew, and Kenneth and Faith loved each other through all of it. It was a simple story, really, of two people who found each other through chance and chose each other through love. In the end, that was all that mattered. The choice to love, to stay, to build a life together despite the odds. And they lived that life fully, surrounded by family and the wide open spaces of North Dakota, under the big sky that Thomas Garrett had found so beautiful in his final days. It was a good life, hard-won and well-lived, and neither Kenneth nor Faith would have changed a single moment of it.